I'm Anthony Lacavera. Over the last 20 years as a founder, CEO, tech investor, and TV host, I've had the privilege of building relationships with incredible individuals that are driving positive impact globally. Trailblaze brings you these conversations with innovators across all walks of life who are carving through uncharted territory with new and unique approaches to design and build a better future for our world. Trailblaze highlights their personal journeys with stories of resilience, business and personal challenges, and the wisdom gained through the eyes of these leaders who are striving to challenge the status quo. Let's get into today's episode. I have Brice Scheschuk here today, a good friend and business partner of mine for many, many years. Recently was named one of the top mentors at Techstars, which is one of the most prominent, globally recognized incubators and accelerators that has a universe of entrepreneurs, VCs, and mentors that's quite substantial globally. So I want to talk a lot about that, Brice. But first, your journey as an entrepreneur, founder, and executive from where you started today, from where you started 20 plus years ago to today. Love to hear that from the top.
Sounds great. Great to be here, Talon. First time we're doing it quite this style.
Yeah, it's been pretty relaxed over the years. Pretty hectic too.
Hectic and relaxed. So here's what I would say. So classic Canadian upbringing, middle class, Saskatchewan. Went to each coast and ultimately landed on doing a business degree at Dalhousie. Came out of that business degree in the mid-90s. And at that time, I say to people, I don't remember the word entrepreneur being said once over the course of my degree.
Throughout the whole curriculum.
The whole curriculum. So kind of unlike you maybe, where you kind of knew earlier and you went right from university to starting something, I didn't have that same set of influences.
And incubators didn't exist at all.
No incubators, no accelerators, no labs, really no on-ramps in the university system to what we see today. So I graduate, very classic situation in my fourth year of university. Do you want to do consulting? Do you want to do banking? Do you want to do marketing? Or do you want to do accounting? And so I took a little run at banking, didn't work, and ended up getting a job to get my chartered accountants.
What did you like about banking? I think you were great at it.
Mid 90s, we were in a bit of we're coming out of a recession in Canada, and I actually went for it, and I was falling down relative to the MBAs. So I wasn't getting through the interview processes. There's actually a bit to talk about there. Like it was a learning for me as to how I was presenting myself and kind of what the competition was like and so on. But I wasn't showing up, and I found with the firms, the accounting firms, I actually was able to show up. So took the job, came to Toronto, which I'd never lived in. And it was a goal to get to the financial capital, and started working in audit for auditing Goldman Sachs, auditing financial services companies. 2 years in, realized that was not for me. Switched within the firm to consulting. And around that time, we know about Netscape.com 1.0 in a big way. You know this well. And in 98, myself and three other guys started a side hustle, which term wouldn't have been used back then. Got a little bit of traction, another term that wouldn't have been used back then. And then
and also it wouldn't have been easily accepted back then, right? Like now, the side hustle, the second effort is kind of commonly commonplace, but those days you could not tell a soul, right?
Yeah, and one of the business partners, I remember a story, he would sneak down into this is an era where like the CNLs and PWCs had libraries. He would go down to the library, they had a Bloomberg terminal, and the venture was stock related.
No internet, no mobile phones, no social media, no camera phones. So you could hide.
You could hide. So he hid, and we got started, left and started our first company. And it kind of went like this for us. Very quick revenue. No VC, none of that world. Actually took it public through a reverse takeover. And then the crash happened in 2001 and right down. So 98 to 01, I like to call it the best education that I had on entrepreneurship.
But that business, if I remember, I remember that business peripherally. Was that the web host industry review, or this is a different one?
That was a different one.
Okay.
That happened after.
Industry review was a successful one.
It was, right? With an exit.
Yeah.
That actually was, I actually started that with a few other people after the first failure and before meeting you.
Okay. Right.
That was the interim phase. That's right.
Yeah. Can we just back up for a second? Saskatchewan and your family and what got you down the CPA road in the first place?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was not my first leaning. Somewhere in high school, I realized that I loved business. And I think it came partly through some courses in high school and partly through like reading the stock tables literally in the Globe and Mail, like that era.
Okay.
And my family were all salaried, middle class kind of. My father was a principal, my mother kind of stayed at home and so on. So I didn't have the role models of business entrepreneurship around me, but I knew that I wanted to do something financial and I wanted to do it on a bigger scale than where I was living. And so my outlet of getting out of that province was joining the Naval Reserve, which confuses a lot of people. How do you join the Naval Reserve in Saskatchewan?
Yeah. How do you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the way that system works is they have what they call land-based ships. That's what they call them. And so there's probably 18 or 20 across Canada. You literally go to a recruiting center, sign up, and if you make it through an application process, you're in uniform and away you go. Wow. And then you do kind of boot campy stuff in your home unit, and then you go to the coast for the real stuff. That's how it worked.
Did you spend time on a ship?
I did. Yeah. I was on 3 or 4. I did what they call a minor war vessel navigating officer course. So to this day, trained in navigation. Unfortunately, haven't exercised it in a long time. Would like to, but
I sure know the technologies. I assume different.
They did not have GPSs on ships back then, if you can believe it. So yeah, way different. But anyways, so
what's like a nugget or like a jewel of learning out of that naval military experience? People talk about all different sort of experiences they get out of any kind of armed forces engagement. What did you take away from it?
So quite a few things. And just to set context, I went what they call officer early, which puts you in a leadership position. So I'm 20 years old, finding myself on a ship with bridge responsibility. We're steaming and I'm in charge. And there are 30 people on that ship under me, under my control. And it's like, what is happening?
How did that happen?
Yeah, how did that happen? So I think that level of responsibility.
Yeah, suddenly thrust into a leadership.
Exactly. Yeah. Without proper training, candidly. So you're learning on the job. That would be one. 2 is it's 24/7 and the work ethic and so on is real. And they are serious about it because of the positions they put you in that can be very troublesome if something happens. So you have to be on game and on ready. And then I got out of the house for the first time and then out of my city. And that really allowed me to see a lot more. There were people from across Canada, a lot of Quebec. I had never really interacted with Quebec or Ontario almost till that point. So you're suddenly exposed across Canada to a bunch of people that you don't know their culture and so on. Of course, we'd laugh to say, that's cultural, that's a cultural thing given the world we live in now. But for me, that was the opening of culture.
Yeah, well, and look, and Canada is actually very diverse. You don't realize it coming from a small town in Saskatchewan. I come from a small town in Welland. I mean, it was a big shift for me when I first came to Toronto.
Totally.
And suddenly it's, a bunch of different cultures together and definitely eye-opening and definitely an adjustment. But the military thing has always caught my attention of like, there's so many, you talk about the work ethic, the discipline, the focus. I mean, those things have to translate well into any kind of career, any walk of life in the business world, right?
Yeah, I think they do. I think that there is a whole bunch of goodness there. And then there's some deprogramming also
that has to happen.
Right? You're in a bureaucracy.
Yeah.
You are super mission driven and then you're kind of quiet and then you come up again and you do this stuff, then you pull back. And there is a bureaucracy that you are part of, that you fit into, to give you an example, people get up to a rank colonel, let's pick a colonel and above. You'll have an office the size of this floor with couches and with people helping you and so on. You decide to release and go into the workforce. Let's just say the colonel gets a rude awakening when he hits the workforce. So the skills of the colonel are amazing.
Yeah.
There is a mental adjustment that happens when you get into the workforce to adapt to a different system.
Yeah.
Some do it better than others. Some systems are better at accepting veterans than others. You and I know in the U.S., they do an amazing job at taking veterans into the civilian world, and they integrate them well, and they actually respect the service. A little different here. You have to work a little harder as an ex-military person to kind of get yourself into the workforce and show your skills.
I can see that. I think Canada has a long way to go.
Yeah,
to really just be appreciative of people that are committing themselves to the service. So back to your career. So we met in 2003. The Web Host Industry Review, you had a good little stint there. Let's start then right from we met.
Okay.
First meeting.
First
I remember it. It was right across the street, actually.
Right. Okay. So I actually don't remember where it was, but it was it was downtown. I had to take a job after .com1 imploded. Had to pay the bills, had to feed the wife, all of that kind of stuff.
And you were just getting married when we met, actually.
And got married just after we met. And so I think it was around September of 2003. I got a recruiting call from a guy, and I was already looking to leave. Like, it was time to get back. .com 1.0 had kind of was starting to turn again. And hey, there's this young entrepreneur building a telecom company looking to, I think it was professionalize or upgrade the management team. Needs a CFO. I think that was kind of the pitch. So great. Yeah, would love to meet him. And I go, and you and I don't know, I think we had a coffee or something.
Yeah.
Was it in a food court?
Yeah, it was literally across the street, I think, at the Movenpick, NBC place.
Right.
Brookfield place. Yeah.
So I remember it as an hour, very dynamic, good back and forth engagement. I wasn't even sure exactly what I was looking for. To be honest with you, I'd had a few interviews, but it wasn't really kind of gelling yet. And I walked out of there feeling pretty jazzed about what you were building and about where you were and about this somewhat messy, if I can call it, situation of scale up with opportunity. I probably couldn't describe it that way back then, but that's when I look back, what I remember.
Well, that is what happened. When from our investment portfolio today at Globalive, we would say something that went from 3 million in revs to 35 million in revs, like pretty quickly, there would be chaos, right? And that scaling, again, it's a term we hear all the time today, but even that word didn't exist. You didn't have just like, you said it right. It was like professionalize the management team. That's kind of the way people thought about it, right? But I actually, looking back at that, we had a startup that you had some overlap with that, right? Just my memory just came to me on this. Enunciate.
Yes.
In your one of the ways we hit it off well was one of the first conversations we had was about your experience as a client of the Globalive business, Enunciate. And it was a less than awesome experience as a customer. I remember that so clearly. And that I think really sort of set the chemistry well right off the start, right? Yes, that I can only imagine how difficult that was. I think you were like a controller there or something. It was
Leitch Technology.
Technologies, yeah.
Don Mills and Eglinton. I do remember that. Yeah. And Enunciate, which was a Globalive portfolio company and a co-founding of yours, was a service provider to Leitch. Yeah. And the CEO was using the service multiple times and kept getting annihilated. And finally she came to me and said, we're going to move this situation out in far less polite language.
Yeah.
And so I had to go and kind of have a bit of an argument with some of the team there.
And that we actually got our act together well with that. That was a great business. I to this day sort of regret selling that business. It was great. And Frank Gentili, our partner, was a great business development guy, right? Built a great client base there, a great business at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Okay, so we then had an amazing run together over the years. And what would you say was sort of a highlight for you in that past, call it 19 years now that we worked together, building out Globalive? And I also want to talk about like a very challenging point and what was the most difficult time for you?
Yeah, so the highlights, I think I look at patterns, and the consistent things that I love the most are when we went to the next step of building. And it was not the liquidity event. It was not money being wired into a bank account if we had a successful investment or a sale. It was always so we acquire Yak Communications. I have such positive memories of the process we went through, almost losing it 3 or 4 times during the process, getting it at the end, all of it closing, and then we're on to building that thing properly. Yeah. I look at Wind, right? We almost missed the Spectrum auction deadline with 10 days or whatever when we met Naguib and you went out to Egypt. Yeah. And you know, there was a sales job to talk through in 10 days. We need $200 million to deposit with the Canadian government. And just that crazy 10 days to get to that conclusion. Those are the things that I love.
That was cool. I remember that flight we took up to Ottawa together, right? To hand in the deposit in person. Yes. And then this look of surprise on the government official's face that he actually showed up with the money to actually do it. That was crazy.
Awesome.
Okay, so then we obviously had a lot of ups and downs over the years. Thankfully, net, we both, I think, ended up in a great place together, many great years ahead. Dark points, difficult points. What was the worst for you, and what did you take away from that as a learner?
Well, I'll say one of my worst, I don't know if it's the worst, was I remember very specifically November of 2009. You and I and a bunch of the team at WIND are in a lawyer's boardroom, as I recall, just after the workday, being told that the government was going to call us and let us know what their decision was as to whether they would allow us to get our license to operate the wireless company. We are in that room. We get the phone call on the Polycom, Starfish, and they give us the news that they are not going to allow us to have our license. Our capital structure and our foreign control didn't work for them, and away we go. And I remember, again, I'm curious as to how you remember this, but I think I have it right. I remember we hung it up, and there was that half an hour of real angst, and it's a real, you're really getting punched in the gut. And then what I remember, though, to the positive is very quickly it coalesced what the next steps were. We talked to, you as a shareholder, me as a shareholder, we talked to our other shareholders, we developed a plan, and then probably the craziest 6 weeks that I can remember, each of us doing our thing to get that over the goal line. And I use that a lot now when I talk about resiliency, when I talk about how you focus yourself to solve a problem, a crisis problem that is that is existential. That was an existential risk for us.
Yeah, and put that into perspective, we had invested at that point some $650, $700 million in network. There were some 40 stores, there were some 500 or something cell towers. I mean, full team built out, ready to launch and burning. I mean, I the numbers that I remember was something close to $10 million a month.
Yes. I remember $1 million a week is what I used, but I think it was more.
Yeah.
I think we were edging on 1,000 people.
Yeah.
Right. And if you remember, so what I found really fascinating about it is we come out of that night, and you and Naguib, as I recall, were kind of joined at the hip around culturally, what do we do and how do we send certain messages to the industry that we are not going anywhere.
We're not going away.
And I have that positive memory of the random acts of kindness.
You are right on with that. And right on with Naguib. I mean, that was one of the most powerful moments in my career is I called, frankly, just scared out of my mind that what he was going to say or do.
Yes.
Being sort of lured in, would have been the perspective into investing all this money in Canada and then being told you can't operate. So if you just look at it from the outside, I can only imagine what he was going to react. But his reaction, I'll never forget, and it taught me so much. His reaction was, we're going to move forward. They're afraid. We hit a nerve. Now's the time to double down. That was his tone immediately.
It's awesome.
It was so powerful for me, and it was so motivating for me. And I think that translated into the conversations that you and I then subsequently had and helped us shape the approach, as you say, with random acts of kindness and everything else we did.
Totally. That guy gave us the MBA in entrepreneurship like 100 times over that project. What I would say to that, though, if I can finish my thought on that story, is I remember this thing that you, Simon, and I did where you went one way to deal with what we just talked about. I got the finance file, and I remember the blitzkrieg of bank discussions that we had. And Simon got the Ottawa file and, on that Porter flight every single day, lobbying and so on. And I just loved the way we worked, came together at the end of every day, recapped, what do we do exactly tomorrow? And it just turned into this incredible flywheel. And then we know how it went. And actually, I tell the story sometimes about when we were in South Beach and we got the news that the license got turned over by cabinet. And that was a fun weekend, and it got a lot more fun.
Yeah,
it did. That was an awesome one.
That was great. Yeah, but you're right. That was probably the most difficult, I think, time for both of us.
Yeah,
17 whatever years. So you've gotten involved in the innovation ecosystem now for a number of years. You're active in it significantly. You've created or co-created MindFrame Connect with a great number of institutions and helping build a curriculum around resiliency and entrepreneurship. You've been mentoring, founders, I think, for the better part of 10 years now, and had lots of different advisory and board roles. But Techstars is sort of a name that everybody recognizes, and you've gotten involved with Techstars. When and how did that go?
Yeah, so when did I get involved? So Sunil Sharma, the guy who runs Techstars Toronto, is a friend of both of ours. And at some point, I think it was in his first cohort, he was looking for people that had some operating experience as well as people that had the tech investing experience. He came to me, maybe to you, I can't remember, and said, hey, do you want to try this mentorship out with Techstars? The format is Mentor Madness, and then pick a founder or two and then go through the rest of our process through to a demo day. I said, yes. A, I like the prominence of Techstars. B, I like the learning opportunity because I hadn't done a lot of that yet. And I wanted to start figuring out some kind of pipeline for us from a deal flow standpoint.
Right.
So that's how it actually started, was the relationship with Sunil.
And Sunil was pretty amazing at sort of orchestrating, getting a platform together for that brand. That brand already had a lot of pedigree and recognition globally.
Yes.
Since your involvement with them, you've been recognized by the founders there and the other mentor and advisor network as one of the leading mentors globally in that network. What would you say are the 2 or 3 things you focus on as a mentor that sets you apart from the crowd of now tens of thousands of people that are engaged in the innovation ecosystem as mentors, which, as we both know, didn't exist even 12 years ago to where we are today. So now everybody's in it. What set you apart as a mentor?
So it's an interesting question, and it's interesting partly because mentors don't get great feedback on actually how they're doing as mentors because people worry about bruising egos and so on. I've tried very hard to be transparent and let's call it authentic, to say, I want to know what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong. I want the feedback. And so that helps me inform a little bit of this. If I could give you my top few, one is we have legit operating experience that when you're talking to an entrepreneur, you're not doing it at theoretical. It's like, we were at WIND and we had to hire 1,000 people in the first year. This is what we did. Okay. So the operating experience is super important. Number 2 is we actually, we forget this, but even though we don't call ourselves true venture capitalists and raise third-party money, we've invested in 100 startups and I've mentored a ton of people that we're not invested in. So we actually have a portfolio pattern recognition of, okay, so KJ at Rescue calls about this. We have 10 other analogs that we can bring very relevant stories and insights to and so on. And I use that continuously. And are you systematic about that? Just on that point for a second, are you systematic about, okay, the Rescue example? Yeah.
Do you have is it mental? Would you go to a mental Rolodex of, okay, I saw that before over here, or do you have a system for yourself in some way?
Great question.
Yeah.
That leads perfectly to the third thing. Mentorship as a discipline. So it wasn't even Techstars that was the awakening for me about getting better. It was Creative Destruction Lab. I show up in Halifax for my first CDL where I'm in the chair and I watch group mentorship for the first time at scale. And I realized I've been doing a ton of things wrong. So that took me down. I want to get better at the craft of mentorship, which actually inspired MindFrame Connect. What does that mean? Treat it as a discipline. Build frameworks so I can start codifying the patterns that I see. Collect the stories. You want to onboard customers for free and convert them to paid? I have 3 stories about that. You want to talk about how you price your SaaS product? That's an hour-long discussion with a whole bunch of work and frameworks. And I've tried to build that in mentally and a little bit on paper for the big issues.
I think that right back to your first point about getting feedback from founders, you kind of glossed over that, but I actually think that's like a really important positioning to take with founders, because you're right. People don't necessarily want to share the real feedback, or they think it's not worth it, or they think they're going to lose the mentor, say, oh, I'm done with you then. If you don't like my advice, forget it, this type of thing. But so I think having your eyes open to improving yourself is something that a lot of mentors, and you talk about this in the context of MindFrame Connect as well, having your eyes open to learn as a mentor is very, very powerful and important to being a great one.
Incredibly powerful. Self-awareness, which a lot of us lose a little as we have success, was the regrounding for me. And if I could give you a comment on feedback, what I would say to you is, when you have that first meeting, you start a very authentic and transparent discussion. You listen, you talk, it's kind of 50-50. You care, you're concerned, and so on. And once you've built that trust, Craig Elias, a guy out west in Alberta, gave us this insight on MindFrame Connect. He goes, no one gives me feedback, so I just ask for it. At the end of every meeting, I say, on a scale of 1 to 10, where did this meeting fall, and how do I make it a 10? And he said, if I've set the conditions right where they trust me and are having the right dialogue.
Yeah, you'll get something.
They will
right
give me
there.
an answer,
Yeah.
and I will get an insight in terms of what to do. That has become a principle in MindFrame.
Oh, that's really interesting, right? Because that's really fresh then in the founders' mind
Totally.
too, right? They've got so many conversations going on. They're learning how to build a business. They got mentors all over the place. Getting the feedback right at the end of a meeting is a great idea.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we think about you as a mentor or an advisor, where do you want to take yourself from where you are today? You've now, as you say, started to codify how this gets done with a curriculum in MindFrame Connect and helping other mentors improve as well as improving yourself. Where does it go from here?
So the goal really is to turn it into a machine where it's not all on guys like you and I to be kind of single-handedly lifting this. So the point of MindFrame Connect is systematizing, building the competencies of mentor and menteeship, and then having ambassadors and other programs take it out to the world. So I'll give you an example, Techstars. So we did it for Sunil, for mentees in his last cohort. He liked it. He took it to Global. We are now having a chat with Global about doing the mentee program for probably 4 or 5 of their cohorts in March, and for mentors as well. And then as like a pilot for Techstars Global.
Awesome.
And I feel like they'll be one step away from then internalizing that and taking that with like having ambassadors that'll take that and just kind of run with it.
Oh, that's
and
great.
we want that everywhere.
Yeah.
As wide as we can get it.
What a great initiative you started with that, man. That's really great, because you're right. It didn't exist globally, right?
It did not. From what we can see, this does not exist.
Yeah, this idea of just putting best practices down.
Exactly.
And the world is moving so quickly too, and technology is moving so quickly too. You can get lost in it when you think about there's some basics in helping people build a business that transcend those things. Right. You'll say, oh, well, I need to learn about whatever the next great thing is, but there's still some fundamentals that you can just focus on and help people build. That's very, very, very cool. All right. Well, so in that vein, some of the founders you're currently mentoring, they're all amazing. You've chosen to help them, and you're helping them in different ways. We spend some time talking about those founders and what are the qualities or characteristics or behaviors or actions or approaches that they take that make them so much better than their peers, and why you're excited to continue to mentor them.
Yeah, we'll do. And I will do it. Some I'm not really super directly mentoring, but they're in our portfolio and I've been able to observe. And so I'll give you it kind of from either side.
Even better actually in that way, because actually those ones where you're showing up more as a passive investor, as a VC.
Yeah.
The VC perspective is great too. So yeah, I think it's great to talk about the ones you're deeply involved with, as well as the ones that you're call it more sitting in the investor chair purely. Yeah.
So I'll start with Catherine Hamuth. Okay. You know her well. I know her well. Catherine is building, extraordinary entrepreneur. She's building a company called ShearTex. What is ShearTex? ShearTex is building ripstop material used in hosiery right now. It'll have many other applications, right? So I'm not an expert in this domain, as you know, but as I understand I'm not wearing a lot of hosiery, but as I understand it, the average life of a traditional pair of silk hosiery is 2 wears.
Yeah.
And it's a disaster.
And it's damaged, right?
It's
ripped and gone, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's a throwaway.
It's a throwaway.
Environmental as well issue, right?
Environmental. It's actually pretty costly, and all of that. So she had a vision to take a material from another domain, a ballistics domain, have it repurposed, reset, and so on, got a global license on it for certain use cases, and then went through the whole process of product iteration to build a direct-to-consumer product in this domain. There's 2 directions I would go with her. Number one is she taught me a lot about my mentorship by explaining what she saw in the Canadian mentor ecosystem around a little bit of small-mindedness, a little bit of a tendency to go right to tactical advice without context, and almost talking her down from taking global risks.
Oh, wow.
Okay. You know this
is a national problem. Yeah, I wrote a book about that problem. Yeah.
Your book was a recognition of this problem. She, by the way, is an excellent example of the opposite of this in Canada, thankfully.
Yeah.
And so she is fundraising. I should be careful with that. She's been in a fundraising process. I think she's up to a Series C, if I recall. And I actually started mentoring her quite a bit later in our relationship. And I have so enjoyed the interaction about how she understands not taking a risk is taking a risk. Staying small actually means she will die and others will kill her. And the ability to kind of articulate a global vision with protected IP for how big this can be. So she, I would call it big thinker, understands anything small-minded blows up what she's trying to build and actually kills her company, and has done something a little non-traditional in Canada, taking a product of this nature, changing its nature, bought a textile factory in Montreal to build her, to vertically integrate her supply chain. She's kind of contrarian in Canada for every step of her business building, and she's going to win. And so I love her.
She already is crushing it. I mean,
crushing it.
Incredible success story.
Yeah.
And look like no end in sight. That's one thing you know her much better than I do. But what I feel whenever I've talked to her is just there is truly total conviction within her that there is no limit to the scope of what she can build.
No limit.
Total conviction.
Yeah. And even if you go before she started it, she worked for, we're going to get them wrong. She worked for a few of the startups you and I would know, maybe Wattpad, maybe one or two others. And I see a person who understood building a base and scaling from it, and then there was the time to launch. And she's just hammering.
That's really
good advisors around the table. Exciting. Yeah, just
there's a nugget in there with respect to mentors too that you mentioned, which is sort of like this making commentary and giving advice with none of the context you need to actually do that, right? And so it's great that she recognized that and said, wait a minute, like I got to take what you just said and discount it, because I know that you only have 1% of the information or less in order to make an assessment that you just made. And so how much can I really take that advice and action it when I know you said it not knowing any of the context? And it doesn't happen in a 2-minute conversation that you can learn about the business that she's got, right? So why do mentors jump into that role of like, they feel like the need that they have to, oh, here's what you should do, right? I don't worry, I got it. I understand what you're saying. Here's what you should do.
I think that is part of the problem. I think, okay, so the first thing I'll say is you just hit the most important principle in mentoring in MindFrame Connect is the giving of prescriptive advice without context is deadly for the mentee. Okay, so you just hit it, number one. Now,
unless you're shopping vermouth and you say, hey, that doesn't make sense to me.
Well, yeah.
Fortunately, a lot of them don't, right? Most don't.
Yeah, and it's a good point, because on the mentee side, when we're talking to them, we talk about how careful you have to be in receiving advice. And if I said to you, hey, Tone, how much should I charge for my SaaS product per month? And you gave me an answer like $200, like that would be the most ridiculous scenario.
Yeah.
So we say to mentees, you become the mentor. If someone does that, you start drilling into their logic to try to actually understand and get their context.
Right.
Yeah. So you actually flip it.
So you do get something from it that way.
You do get something from it.
Right.
But I think that mentors, they get put on a bit of a pedestal. There's a power dynamic, and they are scared, maybe partly ego, maybe partly ecosystem, to actually say, I don't know, I don't have context. Here's some stuff I've seen. I can introduce you to someone. I think it's around those kinds of issues. And they actually haven't been well instructed on how to honestly just do that. And quite frankly, transparency and being honest about it builds the best trust and connection with the mentee.
Yeah, cool. So, well, look, it's been great. It's going to be great to watch Catherine listen to a global success. I know she's already well on her way, but okay. So another one. Let's go through 5 or 6 of these.
Let's do another one. So KJ Singh, Kuljeev Singh, CEO, founder of Rescue. Okay, Rescue, just for everyone's knowledge, very prominent in the ecosystem right now, raised from Tiger in their last round, which...
Oh yeah, I just saw it just recently. Yeah.
Just recently. Takes you up 5 levels when that kind of company comes into your cap table. So KJ had and the company itself is a restaurant repair and maintenance marketplace. So think of it, demand side restaurants, supply side contractors, HVAC, plumber, electrician, guys who fix equipment. He marries them up on a tech platform, fixes maintenance in a like preventative maintenance, very quick responses to if a cappuccino machine is down at Tim Hortons,
right?
You are losing hundreds of dollars an hour in revenue.
So you get someone there quick.
Yeah. Payments are very easily arranged. Work order tracking, so you know where it is. And interestingly, as you know, with data, preventative maintenance. And I think the Tim Hortons example is relevant because if I recall correctly, he said they installed in 30 Tim Hortons and they started to see a pattern with, I think it was the ice cap machine. And so they could preemptively solve
that's huge. It's going to go down next week. Let's deal with it now. Well, that's
got it.
Wow. And so is he actually got some machine intelligence around that predictive analytic, or?
I believe there is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow, that is
I believe there is. They've got some algorithms in there.
All right. So what makes him extraordinary for you as a founder?
So he is the guy that has been the most thoughtful at building his cap table. Okay. And it's an interesting story because he was a VC. He was a young VC at IGAN. You remember IGAN? He left to do the operator thing, which, happens sometimes. Many times it's in reverse, but he went that way. Started the business. Round one, IGAN, 5 or 6 angels that were very strategic to next round and to advice. An Uber, a marketplace, a restaurant, this, that.
So sort of very thoughtful on who are the angels I
Unbelievably
want.
thoughtful.
Okay.
And he called me. We built a relationship over a few years. I like your operating experience. I might want you to, I might call you to ask you something. Would you guys throw in? He built a long relationship with me, so it was a very easy call. You may recall we had an IC, and it's like, we have to back this guy. I think it was a 3-minute discussion.
Yeah. I remember you having total conviction on the guy. Yeah, absolutely. It was one of those where we just,
One of those.
Yeah.
Inovia was in round one.
Yeah.
Golden was it. It was crazy, this cap table.
But it sounds like a bunch of great angels too.
Great angels, great institutionals. He goes,
And so, how was he? So, was he strategic about that? And
Yes.
what are the conversations you had? Was he saying, okay, like, Brice, what are the universe of skill sets and experiences that you think I need given the business I'm trying to build? Was it sort of one of those? And how did he go about it?
so that, yes. And the other thing is, what does the chessboard look like 2 to 3 rounds ahead? If I know Matt Golden and I get him early, he has a lot of connections into the investor community in the Valley. Inovia, similar story. And this and that, and also partly almost not a give back, but it's good to have trusted people around the table, guys like us who have that founder empathy, can walk in the shoes and take that, go on that journey with him.
Yeah. So balance the Matt Golden, who's also a great founder-friendly VC, but still a VC.
Yeah.
With it, guys that are going to sit on your side of the table.
The operator, the ex-founder who's now an angel, whatever it is. So that was one. Then he had a very big breakthrough in his late seed where he started showing results, and he brought homebrew, which I don't know if you know the homebrew guys. There's an ex-Google guy in there who's super well regarded. Hunter Walk is his name.
Okay.
Their first investment in Canada. They are the guys that sit in the middle of the valley and see everything. So Hunter and his partner in New York came in, and that was the first check they wrote in Canada. Everyone's heads go up. Homebrew's coming in to rescue. Started creating a talent attraction flywheel. Took him up a level in advice. Hunter has seen the monster situations down there. So he actually, KJ told me one thing he learned from Hunter was he needed to slow down a little and not worry about month over month change in revenue. He had to build his foundation properly. I'm like, that kind of advice is awesome. So he does that. Pandemic hits. Had cultivated his shareholder base such that he could do a top-up round.
Oh, but
Think about restaurants.
Oh, yeah.
He like all his customers shut down, right? Went through a very careful management of the pandemic. And I remember he said, I have 3 or 4 product things that I now have the downtime to do. And they are the big 3 or 4 that changed this company.
Oh, so interesting, right? So change the product roadmap, use it as an opportunity. I mean, that's an amazing pivot. But I got to tell you, what's interesting about that too is there was no point in our ICs or in our conversations where you ever said to me, rescue's in trouble.
Never.
But it now that you say it, the customers were literally shut down.
Yes.
For an extended period of time.
Yeah, and think about it. It's a marketplace, transactional. If no one's fixing equipment, there's no payment to rescue.
Yeah.
The other beauty, by the way, is he changed his business model to include a SaaS-enabled dashboard, the data feature that I mentioned around equipment and preventative maintenance.
For restaurants. Yeah, so he's
now into the head offices and so on.
And it's for equipment manufacturers too, so it's the cappuccino machines.
So I think if he's not, he will be.
Yeah.
That's how I would say it.
Sweet.
He might be though.
Wow.
Yeah. And then to finish that story, it then extends into, they come out of the pandemic, all that product stuff hits, and he raised Tiger. And you should see this last round Tiger canvas, like it A-star
Pile on.
It's he's got the Eventbrite guy in there. He's got our CFO in there. Like it's It's the greatest cap table we've seen in the ecosystem.
Good for him.
In our portfolio.
So that's actually, there's two great ones in there. That strategy and building that cap table very carefully right from the outset, making sure you've got the right people, VCs and angels. But then also that pivot story during the pandemic is remarkable, right? How many businesses got destroyed in the pandemic, and his could have been one of them, but he took the opportunity to advance the product roadmap. And,
big time.
Yeah, and add value to customers. Okay, so Brice, next great founder on your mind.
Okay, next great one on my mind is Len Friedman and Sasha Davids at Wellness Living. Why do I love these guys? So, Tone, they really fit with our style, which is that beast of sales and biz dev and commercial. So, company's called Wellness Living. They've got a SaaS platform that they are the primary business software for gyms, spas, boot camps, those kind of businesses, including payments. I would call them, you know, how we were investors in Touch Bistro, call it the Touch Bistro for gyms, spas, and related. Okay. So two guys came out of the health and fitness world and are absolutely tenacious commercial selling types. That's their persona, the selling persona. And because of that, they were actually able to get very early revenue traction, and they followed the adage that you and I love. The best place to fundraise your business is from customers. And they got quite quick traction there. And they were able to basically bootstrap their business, interestingly, using a little bit of debt, some BDC debt, as I recall. They quite quickly crossed over. They're Ukrainian, so their dev was predominantly in the Ukraine at very reasonable prices in a slightly different era. And they just kind of ground it through. And if I could give, respecting confidences, they are low single-digit million primary capital. They are noticeable double-digit ARR and payments in SaaS on that kind of capital efficiency. And I think they've got a huge market. They compete against the MindBodies of the world and so on. And I see nothing changing in their trajectory with respect to that commercial and bootstrap mindset.
So to get that going, that V1 that got them the early revenue, was it something where they had an MVP that they could quickly get into the market, combining with their sales expertise? Was there just a huge market need that when they walk in the door, every gym and spa says, yeah, that's interesting from what I have today? Or how did they exactly get that early revenue?
That's a great question. So they had some product experience with a slightly different piece of software. And if I recall correctly, it was to allow gyms to book or to bring customers in through a booking engine that was more of a customer acquisition tool. Okay. And they saw the white space to build let's call it a lower version of this gym software than what MindBody has. MindBody being the premium, higher end version, kind of selling to the multi-location. They saw an opportunity to do that at the independents. And so the act of having that smaller piece of software kind of led them to the bigger market. And I think they always had that mindset, though, of keeping it lean and bootstrapping their end. But yeah, they did have a product that led them there.
Yeah, it's a good question. So extraordinary capital efficiency, too.
One of the best we've seen in our portfolio. Yeah.
Cool. Who else?
Okay, where to next? Emily Cushman at Cura Talent.
Oh, yeah. What an amazing story Emily is.
She's
amazing, awesome. Amazing story.
Yeah, so I mean, you know her as well as I do.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, she was one of the first people we supported at Next.
That's right.
Canada, when it was the Next 36 program.
That's right.
She was, I believe, like an early grant that we gave. It was early before even fundraising. I think she got some non-dilutive capital from us, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Did she?
I don't remember the non-dilutive, but here's what I remember. So, first cohort of Next Canada. You are a co-founder of Next. Yep. You were a co-chairman, if I recall. Yeah. You were involved in it.
Yeah.
And great organization to this day.
It really is.
In that era, it was super necessary. We had far less acceleration.
One of the first.
One of the
first in Canada. Yeah, circa 2009.
Right. She goes through that. We meet her. We all take an instant liking to her. She's extraordinarily likable and a good young founder. We put some money in, and if I recall correctly, her first product was targeted at HR, recruiting. That's going back a ways. She pivoted to an admissions platform for university using video and other tools, right? And so, and really when I think about her, I think about the following. She was in a domain, so ed tech, actually selling to university faculties directly. That is a slow, ugly grind of a business. Capital efficiency becomes important. She did raise institutional capital, but she managed it in a way to allow her to survive those enterprise sales cycles. She was lean, almost bootstrapped in mentality, I would say. That's one point that always resonated with me. The second thing is that, as you and I have talked about in the past, she actually got edged out of her own, not completely out of her own company, but in the CEO chair to bring in a more experienced operator. And she did it in a very professional and agreeable way. She stayed in the company. And as we know, that eventually fell apart, that situation. And she came back to the chair.
Yeah.
The entire time watching her dilution, being very careful with capital when she came back in, rebuilt the company's culture from scratch, probably had a bunch of team replacement, as I recall. And at that point, really understood the domain as to how to sell and how to deal with capital efficiency, and ultimately shepherded that deal to a recent exit, as we know, to a company called ETS.
Yeah.
So she had some very dark days in that middle phase.
Yeah.
And I was mentoring her a little bit back then. I've done a lot more in the recent era around her transaction and so on.
Yeah, and she very kindly credited you with the success of her exit. I saw that correspondence.
Awesome.
Yeah, that you were the single biggest influencer, positive influencer as a mentor.
Yeah, I mean, it's very kind of her to say that. Like she had 3 or 4 of us around the table, all kind of getting very good at seeking counsel. She knew she wasn't an expert in M&A, and really just a coachable, solid 30-year-old, I think, founder who is going to finish up a transition. And then I think she's got unlimited opportunity ahead, and you and I will be backing her again.
100%. That's one of those, when we get the call, we'll be happy to jump in quickly. Yeah. One of the things that I like the most about Emily Cushman is very early on, she decided to try to give back to the ecosystem.
Yes.
And I don't know how many years now that she's been active at Next as an alum, but I know she's been on the board a number of years now. I don't know, 4 or 5 years, maybe more, at least. And so, one of those people that in the midst of building a business, and certainly it wasn't something that I thought about in my career until later in life about how do I give back to the ecosystem. We were circa 2009 when we sponsored Next as an example. That was like sort of 10 years in, 12 years into the Globalive story. So for Emily to be like, 4 or 5 years in and say, I'm going to set aside some of my time to give back to the ecosystem that helped me so much get to where I am. That type of character really is the kind of person you want to be around, and the kind of person you want to back, independent of the outcome. Actually, in this business, it's still something that sort of really resonated with me as an extraordinary personality and person.
100%. She's awesome, and I think we're starting to see more of that in the ecosystem. And what we always say is, get mentoring early. You don't realize how quick you have something to give back to the next generation, right? Yeah. 1 year from your starting point, there's a new entrepreneur, and they don't know anything, and you can help them.
Yeah, and in many ways,
bang on right.
Yeah, and in many ways, we're coming with, call it, decades of experience and operating experience. But there's, actually for me, if I think back to my second year, third year as a founder, if someone with 5 or 6 or 7 years at that time had said to me, hey, here's probably a mistake you're making right now, that would have really had a powerful positive impact on me. So, someone more relatable, someone that's closer to my situation. When people sit across the table from us at this stage of our careers, I mean, we're sort of so far in, and so it's a different conversation, and we're bringing something different to the table. But I agree with you. If you could bring something, if somebody like Emily could give back to someone who's just a junior founder to her, but much closer to her, it's going to be very effective and a different perspective, right? Yeah. Okay, so we've got a couple more. What else are you thinking?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about Jordan Bosch at 7 Shifts.
Oh yeah, well, also exceptional story. Wow. Yeah.
And again, I don't know if I'm cherry picking too much, but we talked about KJ and Tiger Global. As we know, 7 Shifts just announced the SoftBank financing. So we got 2 of the big guys in the scenario. But here's most of my interaction with Jordan was very early in his journey, and he quickly kind of moved into the bigger cap table, and I had less mentorship with him. And what I remember is, okay, and you're going to see my biases come out here. Born in Regina, Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
half an hour after.
Right back to the top of the conversation.
Right back to the top. Half an hour after I meet him, I find out we figure out we went to the same high school.
Okay.
Of course, 25 years after me.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to understand my age. His parents owned the Quiznos franchise in Regina. Starts working in the parents' business, sees the scheduling issues with restaurant, particularly back in that era, actually started a company to help solve it, but it was the on-prem where you'd have to run around with discs and so on to load up.
Oh, wow.
Couldn't scale it. Okay. Rise of mobility. It's like, I got to do this again. Starts the cloud's restaurant scheduling company. Okay. I think it was him, maybe by himself, maybe with his partner. Okay. Like his life partner, now his wife.
Restaurant cloud scheduling. So what does that mean exactly? Just what the company does?
Yeah. Just very quickly, you have shifts in a restaurant and you have a bunch of employees, wait staff, cooks and so on, dishwashers, all that. You have the act of scheduling that, I've heard, is 5 hours a week of someone's time done manually. So he automates it all. He automates the messaging between, like with staff, the ability to shift shifts, all that kind of stuff.
Trade shifts.
Labor productivity, like there'd be a lengthy kind of data play in there as well. And as Alex Baker actually told me at Relay, who's an investor, he said the value proposition of 7 shifts is so easy to sell. $70 a month, knocking out like 5 hours a week manual.
Right.
He's probably underpricing it.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. But I don't have context, so I can't say stuff like that, right? So I meet him, and at that point, he gave me that origin story, and then he was bootstrapping, living at home. He taught himself organic search and started getting real customer acquisition. And he's like, I don't know what I don't know. I want to go to the Valley and get experience down there. So he applied to a Draper accelerator, went down, kind of got a proper traction boot camp, allowed him to really systematize more what he was doing and think about talent differently and all these other things. Got a note from them, came back, continued to bootstrap. I can't even remember. I think I met him through the guys at Touch Bistro, who he was trying to he was hooking into their POS.
Right. I remember that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bovin gave us the intro, and I met him, and it was just so obvious. We had come through Touch. We'd started to understand the industry, and his traction was insane. And so Alex invested at Relay, we invested, and then that started a journey. And there are 2 comments I'll make that stick out for me with him. Number one is, I think he would have been told 1,000 times, you can't build a business in Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
Okay. Of course.
Yeah.
Right. He's like, no, this is a province of smart people. We have computer science graduates that come out of 2 universities and colleges. We can make this happen. And he has become one of the core ecosystem players in Saskatoon, alongside Vendasta, Coconut, and a couple of others, all around building this ecosystem. He is a complete loyalist and ecosystem builder. Point, love it. Okay. Number 2 is, I remember distinctively, I think we had already done our round and he was doing his next round. And an investor who we all know started playing games with him as he was getting through the process. He thought he was going to bring that investor into the cap table, and they were going to lead it, and they started to kind of retrade a bit. And he is so moral value, character oriented that he actually went back to them, called them on it, and never took their money.
And said no.
And never will. And he had the confidence to do that, partly with some counsel, I think, from Alex, maybe a little bit from me. I can't remember exactly, but I love that. And actually, sorry, I do have a third. The third, and this is something I do this Founder Institute presentation, and I use him as the example. Growth is never the perfect straight line up and to the right. You and I know that better than anyone. I think there was a point at which he was going to raise maybe his A, and he wasn't quite getting exactly the signals that he wanted from the investor group.
Good.
In Western Canada at that time, there was a FedDev equivalent, called like an IRAP equivalent, called the Western Economic Diversification. And he ended up getting 3 million non-dilutive. He was doing his A. In parallel, he goes for Western Economic, if I recall, it was 3 million. I think it kicked his A out 18 months, completely changed his valuation, changed the investors that would participate. And we always talk about adding non-dilutive smartly at the right times. he is the poster child of the best use of non-dilutive I've seen in our portfolio.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there's like 5 learnings with him. And he's just a super humble, he has humility. He just raised, 80, 90, $100 million Canadian from SoftBank. I heard he sold 10,000 restaurants last year. Like, he's just on fire. So we couldn't be happier.
What a great story. And Saskatoon.
Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Started in Regina, and somehow I don't know how we moved to Saskatoon, but that's okay.
Awesome. Who else have you got?
Now, I think I have one more, and we're going to talk about Max Tremaine at Sherpa.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Wow.
And I have to tell this story because it involves you. So you're as we know, you're a busy guy. We got lots of investments. You're not focused always on the smaller portfolio companies in our portfolio, and that's fine, right? I remember distinctively in the pandemic, you're traveling, you're flying American Airlines.
Oh, yeah.
And you send me a note.
I forgot about that.
You send me a note saying, I don't know how this happened.
Yeah.
Is this truly the Sherpa that we were invested in?
Yeah.
And Max had embedded Sherpa inside the American Airlines travel application globally.
Completely. I mean, it's still in there, I think.
It's still in there.
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, and it was a super deep integration, and you didn't know that, and you actually found it through a check-in process.
Yeah,
as
it's
I recall.
right there. It's still on in the app. It's still I can't believe how he did that. It's right there on the homepage, planning a trip, and Sherpa helps you plan your trip, and it takes you right to apply.joinsherpa.com.
It's awesome.
That's still set up that way. I couldn't believe it.
Well, and
made in Canada with love.
Made in Canada
right in the American Airlines app.
And what I love about it too is that, it was truly a serendipitous finding for you.
Yeah.
You were not expecting it, and suddenly it's like, is this the Sherpa that we are invested in?
Yeah.
It was just, and I do say to people, and I said it to Max, the founder, I said, Tony is not a guy who gets in the weeds on product.
Yeah. That's for sure. Right.
And you had blasted me with 5 ideas that I actually relayed to Max, and we had a great discussion.
Yeah, because truly, when is the last time I weighed in on product with you? I don't know that I've ever done that, actually.
Look, travel, what gets Mr. Lacavera out of bed? And there's definitely some travel tech in there. But look, Max, let's just talk about what he does, right? He is basically the API for airlines and travel operators to reduce cross-border friction of visas. That's his mission. So Tony wants to go to Europe and needs to get one of those, what do you call those, ESTAs? Those electronic visas, basically a tax grab. That was all manual before. He's automated the whole thing. And so very interesting market size, super cumbersome. So the pain points are clear. And he's cruising along and he's building, and it's pre-pandemic and he's doing his job and it's all interesting. And then the pandemic hits and no one can fly. What do you do? He's another one of these crisis founders. And actually, he would be the poster child for the one who came out the strongest, from the weakest to the strongest in the pandemic.
How?
He saw the need. Airlines started to think about revenue even more differently than they already had. Sure, they were charging for everything, but they hadn't actually thought about turning this into a revenue stream and having the downtime to integrate stuff like this into their technology. He goes out and he starts American Airlines, Japan Airlines, Cathay Pacific. I think he's got Qantas. He's got a ton of Europeans. He's got something like 125 in various stages of implementation. He is owning this market. And when you start looking at the metrics around what happens when people start crossing borders again, this frictionless tech experience, I actually get giddy at this one in our portfolio. And what I like about Max is that he's again, Canadian boy, a lot of humility. We've had short but thoughtful interactions. He listens. He has managed a cap table very well, going through a difficult time. And just at peak crisis, you've lost all sales momentum. He was able to repackage himself, change his APIs a little bit, and then sell the largest travel operators in the world.
Well, what he's got in the functionality that I've seen as well, and again, it's in my face, so I fly on American Airlines occasionally. Yeah. It's there. Is the COVID restrictions.
Yes.
So I thought what's really interesting is he used the pandemic as an opportunity to say, okay, I've already building out these relationships with airlines. My mission is around streamlining the travel process, making it simple, cross-border, making that simple. Then the pandemic happens. So now it's not only how can I integrate with airlines that care more about revenue, but it's also what can I add on in terms of functionality that's going to be immediately useful and potentially useful in the long term. I'm sure he must have been thinking this might be a transient thing and COVID testing might go away or COVID restrictions might go away. Hopefully they do go away. But if it doesn't, now I've positioned another revenue stream with everybody that just suddenly needed it. So I thought him reacting so quickly to that new demand was a pretty interesting move, right? Where a lot of people might have been nervous about, okay, I need to hunker down right now. The world is ending, revenue, my clients might all go bankrupt. This like really dark times at the start of the pandemic, flying stops. You might say the last thing on your mind is how do I expand my product offering? But he thought about it quickly. So it's a really interesting, how and why do you think he did that?
You were saying it better than I did, the way you framed that. One of his wedges was creating the new API for the COVID travel that everyone wanted to be able to put on their app.
I see. Okay.
So you are correct. And I am actually not giving the full story as effectively. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
I believe.
Oh, so that became the on-ramp.
I think that was one of his on-ramps.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So I think I think on-ramp was API for COVID and awareness in the airlines now of this of being able to charge revenue for anything, right? They'll take it. I think it was a bit of both. And there might even be another API that he added in that allowed him to wedge in as well. So you're actually saying it better than I did. Why do I?
So there's something in that, right? Like a founder, like thinking laterally.
Yes.
It's sort of like I can keep running up the middle, keep costs under control. I'm in a pandemic. Customers have lost revenue, lost customers, and their own customers, and they're panicked. And then it's thinking laterally, right? There's like a lateral move there that was made. That I think that is that something where just keep your head up kind of thing, or was there some systematic thing he did that we could draw from that for other founders as a trait?
It's a very good question, and I think that the best founders do actually have that kind of thinking. And in crisis, to use this crisis example, I think that we're not going to turtle, go in a corner and just try to cockroach and survive. Maybe there's a few that have to do that because it's just so dark. The best ones actually pop their head up, talk to their customers. Let me probe for where the opportunity is. Oh, American Airlines, you need to instruct people about COVID, and that's an obvious marketing opportunity. And boom, I've got the tech to do that and the infrastructure. The best founders do it that way. And we have...
Right. That's what it is. Right? Yeah. That's what it is. It was a customer outreach and a listening.
Exactly.
Right?
Listening to your customers.
Back to first principles.
Back to first. Yeah. And we talked a lot about that in the mentoring at the start of the pandemic, getting back to customer development, discovery, first principles. And actually we saw that Wellness Living did a bit of that with the gym shutting down. Yishay Waxman at Thriver, Platters, used to be Platters.
Oh, right. Platters.
They lost their entire customer base. They had to reset the company. The best ones get their head up quick and are out probing immediately. And there is an attribute there.
You just mentioned a couple more founders for us to talk about. We'll do it another day. Brice, great to talk to you today, man. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Good to hang out.
Super great.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Trailblaze. Would love to hear from you. Tweet me or comment on LinkedIn or Instagram and share what you took away from this episode. This show was produced by Creator Club Studios. You can start creating today at creatorclubstudios.com.